Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Very warm welcome to this Current Legal Problems lecture for the evening. My name is Mark D'Souza. I'm one of the editors of the Current Legal Problems lecture series and journal. My role today is purely ornamental. I will simply introduce the chair for today's lecture. The lecture, by the way, is Devyani Prabhat's lecture on Not Just in Outer Space, a story of aliens in nationality law. So I will introduce the chair for today's lecture, and then the chair will introduce the speaker, and we will proceed from there. So our chair for tonight is the Right Honourable Lord Lloyd-Jones, who is a Justice of the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom. He was called to the bar in 1975 at Middle Temple, and en route to becoming a Justice of the Supreme Court in 2017, he has been a recorder, a Queen's Counsel, a High Court judge, and a Lord Justice of Appeal. It's really a very great honour to have you here moderating the event and the Q&A session that will follow the lecture. So the format for tonight is that Professor Prabhat will speak for approximately 35 to 40 minutes, followed by about 10 to 15 minutes of Q&A. We realize that's quite a short time for you to get all your questions in. And so we invite and encourage you to join us immediately after the lecture, just outside this room, where we will have a short drinks reception. You can then perhaps catch Professor Prabhat and ask any burning questions that you didn't have the chance to ask previously. The only other thing I will say before handing over to Lord Lloyd-Jones is that we are not expecting any fire alarms. So if there is one, it's the real deal, so please take it seriously. And that apart, we should be good to go. Lord Lloyd-Jones.
Very good. If there's a fire alarm, just follow me. Well, Mark, thank you very much for your kind introduction and welcome. It's a great pleasure to be here with you this evening on this special occasion and to be able to introduce Devyani. Earlier this month, on the 3rd of February, Warwick University faced Oriel College, Oxford on University Challenge. And the following question was a starter for 10. In English ecclesiastical history, what single word can precede priory to refer to a religious establishment governed by a house or institution outside of England, usually France? In British law, this term is defined by the British Nationality Act 1981 as a person who is neither a Commonwealth citizen, nor a British protected person, nor a citizen of the Republic of Ireland, and is commonly designated transient or resident. Anybody tell me the answer? You may not confer.
They don't have the buzzers.
They don't have the buzzers. Alien. And the question was answered correctly by Thomas Hart of Warwick University, and his team went on to win very convincingly. And I noted that, incidentally, that he's from Miskin in South Wales. This evening, it's a great pleasure to introduce Professor Devyani Prabhat from Bristol University, who is going to speak on precisely that topic. I don't think we're going to hear very much about English ecclesiastical history, but she has promised a journey of discovery on the origins, evolution, and transmission of the term alien in immigration and nationality, covering English history and the current UK law, as well as developments in some other jurisdictions. It's a great pleasure to introduce her. Thank you very much, Devyani. We greatly look forward to your lecture.
Thank you, David. Thank you, everyone, for coming here today for the lecture. And really big thanks to David for this wonderful introduction and to the editors of Current Legal Problems for inviting me here. I'm really looking forward to talking to you about the word alien, its evolution, how it came into the common usage, how it made its way into law, and then into science fiction and other places, and also its transmission to other jurisdictions out of this country as well. I actually thought that the word alien must be really closely connected to science fiction somehow, because I had come across this more in the context of Star Trek while growing up. And so I thought, okay, so aliens are from outer space, so there's this whole concept of the other, and so maybe that's how we get this whole idea of alien. But not surprisingly, it's much older. The etymology of the word goes back to at least the 1300s, when it starts from, we get it in Old French, we get it in Latin from alienus, and then we can see some definitions of it, and it means that someone born out of a foreign land, of a strange prince is the word that's used actually. A sense of foreignness belonging to another. Now, strange doesn't mean weird here. Strange just means foreign in that language used. So there is a concept of then being somebody who is not belonging here, wherever we're talking about, right from the very beginning. Also, we see in commentaries in 18th century, Blackstone's commentaries on the laws of England, when he says that you can have two kinds of people, two categories, someone who is a man, either alien gena, an alien, or subjectus, that is a subject born. So now we are getting a contrast between two categories, the alien and the subject. But we shall see if they're exactly diametrically opposite or we get other categories in between. Science fiction has started using the word alien much later. So I have here on the left side War of the Worlds, which is H.G. Wells using the word alien, but mainly Martians. So he's got these creatures who are not really humanoid, and those are aliens there. Then I've got Men in Black on the right side, but in between, in the 20s and 30s and 1900s is when the word usage really picks up in science fiction. You have Theodore Sturgeon, who writes a lot about aliens in the 1920s and 30s, and then that gets picked up in scripts for Star Trek in 1966. And the first series, we see a lot of different brave new worlds they go to. And so, again, the idea of the other comes in there, but we see the other as the extraterrestrial. In the 80s, the most famous film is E.T., which uses the word alien quite often. Then we have a series of films titled Alien. Men in Black is here for a reason. Men in Black is very interesting because you have these two agents, they have more of them, the Men in Black, who actually look at alien refugees on Earth. They're outer space refugees on Earth. And there are many sort of jokes in which they talk to immigration officers in the US and say, oh, you keep America safe from the aliens. And it's really funny because they're conflating these different meanings of the word alien. So I'm not just bringing this in because I love science fiction, I do, but it's because I think fundamentally now we have a shift in how this word is being used, to the extent that if you Google the word alien, of course you will get many more hits about ETs and space aliens than you will get about this old concept of the foreign prince and, the alien there. But to come back to more recent times, I do not know where this picture, what was the origin of this picture, but it's a good one for connecting what Biden suggested in 2021, which was to have an amendment to the Immigration and Nationality Act 1952 and remove the use of the word alien and bring in non-citizens. Now, you will not be surprised that did not happen. And current regime is a different one altogether. We now have the use of the word illegal aliens quite prominent in the media. Not just that, it's been one of the main planks of policy to remove undocumented migrants from the United States. So we don't have that talk about removal of the word alien. Also, the use of the word alien is quite extensive in US laws. So even if it was removed from the Immigration Act, it would exist in many other legislation. So on that point, I also want to say Trump's recently been talking about a particular act about aliens, which is the Alien Enemies Act of 1798. And he's been talking about using the power under that act to remove undocumented migrants. So we need to, I think, find out what that is, and I shall return to that one. Coming to the UK, most recent act with the word alien in its title is this one, the Invasive Alien Species Enforcement and Permitting Act Order 2019. It is actually about invasive species. So there's a Japanese knotwood plant on the top slide and the ladybird below, because they are considered bad for biodiversity, the indigenous situation, and they are actually other species. So again, we don't have much new legislation using alien in the sense of a foreign human being, but we do have its use in the other legal sense in the Act, and They are definitely different species. So that's something for us to bear in mind. I was surprised because in legislation, I could not find the use of the word alien so much in the UK context. But when I looked into case law, the word alien does come up very often in many of the cases. And so I started wondering why. And I have picked only one example for you, but mainly it comes up in the national security context. So I'm going to just amplify this one, which is A and others versus Secretary of State for the Home Department, a very famous case about indefinite detention of foreign nationals. I use the word foreign nationals. The legislation, which was about detaining foreign nationals indefinitely in the context of national security, also uses the words foreign nationals. It does not really use the words alien anywhere. It's Anti-Terrorism Crime and Security Act 2001. It doesn't use the word alien. If you look at the judgment, 54 times there is the word alien. Submissions made to the court by the lawyers on both sides use the word alien. So I really wondered why. And the judgment itself is extremely pro-human rights. It's about how you cannot detain people who are foreign nationals indefinitely because that would really be a disproportionate response. It's about Article 5, and it's a really resounding victory for human rights. But what was surprising is how many times the word alien came up. So I wondered about it and then saw the link between this usage and other national security contexts as well, where the word comes up. And I think that there is a strong link then between the use of the word alien and the concept of allegiance and protection. So I did some more digging and looked up how the word alien turns up in the context of bearing allegiance. And what comes out is that in the times of medieval England feudal structure, you see very much the concept of bearing allegiance and being protected for bearing allegiance. So basic structure of society, you have peasants who have this allegiance towards the lords or barons, who are their landlords, who are supposed to protect them, but they collect money from them. And then the lords and barons have their loyalty to the king, and they also pay dues to the king. It's not just indirect, it can also be a direct link between the king and the peasants whenever they invoke the king's name in terms of asking for better conditions for themselves. And they say then, we bear allegiance to the king, therefore our landlords need to treat us better. So that narrative comes in too. And at that time, when you look at the categories, there's something special that comes out for the first time, which is a category called a denizen, who is neither an alien nor a subject, but somewhere in between. So who is a denizen? Usually in the feudal structure, there are people who do not fit in very well. They are merchants, they are foreign traders who are quite wealthy, who are in society, but they're not subjects, and therefore they do not have any protection. So they start sort of thinking about how to get better protection for these people who are considered good for the economy, really. So the king says, I will give you a letter of denizenship, and that is the process of endonization and becoming a denizen, and then you get the protection. It's a very expensive way of doing it because it used to cost a lot of money. However, when we had refugees fleeing France, the Huguenots who came, they were actually exempted from paying this fee. So we have instances like that. And the book that you see on the left is a collection of all the denization letters from 1603 to 1700 by a person named Shaw. And it really is a very rich source of history, giving all the various kinds of letters that people are given at this time. The first record of this is in 1295 with a French foreign national who is given this status. He's a merchant, Elias Daubeny, quite a famous case. But it continues till a lot until the Tudor age, when naturalization becomes more popular than this method. I will come to naturalization in a little bit, but I also want to talk about the most common way that one can have full subjecthood. So these denizens never became full subjects. They couldn't actually transmit that status. They could still be taxed at double the rate than any other subject. So subject was someone more special. Who is a subject? We always start from Calvin's case if we want to understand subjecthood. It's an old case, 1608, and involves a 3-year-old person who was born in Scotland. Now, Calvin, in this, has some land in England and is, however, born in Scotland, right? So previous to this era, before King James VI of Scotland also became King James I of England, we didn't have a system whereby someone in Scotland can be considered a subject here of the English system. But in this particular case, it was held that since James has unified the crown, if any person is born anywhere within this territory, they become, just by birth, the subject of the king. So a person born in Scotland for the first time becomes a subject of this unified crown simply by birth. Now, great outcome, I think, for the person concerned in the case, because they wanted to be able to hold this land. But there have been some problems with this idea that if there is territory that's directly taken up by a king, then everybody in it will be subjects. So a reason to think about that is when you think about how colonialism worked. If you went and got some other lands, added it to the crown's empire, automatically everyone has no choice. They're becoming subjects. On the other hand, there is another side to this. This gives rise to jus soli as a concept, right? You get birth citizenship. Later, not at this point. At this point, there's no idea of citizenship. It's all about subjecthood. But the idea of being born on the land and therefore having a claim starts from this point onwards. And of course, a lot of people will say that that has been a better way of accessing citizenship in many parts than ones which are through blood links. So I think this is a case with a bit of a mixed legacy. But, people sitting at that time are not thinking about all the repercussions. Main point for us is this is how you became a subject mainly, by birth. Otherwise, you would have to do something called naturalization. So naturalization starts more in the Tudor times. Now, my friend Sarah Cooper is a barrister. She shared her ancestors' naturalization documents. So that's what you're seeing over here. People could naturalize and they could become a subject from being an alien. So they were not becoming citizens, but they could become subjects. And if you see here, they were born outside the empire. So this is a Romanian person who then has to naturalize through this process. It really, prior to 1708, naturalization from the Tudor times involved the entire parliament passing a private act to make someone naturalize. Again, a very expensive, cumbersome process. Later on, it becomes more streamlined, and you can have kind of a government minister, essentially the Home Office now, who then goes through your documents and certifies you as naturalized so far as you fulfill certain conditions, character, etc. And you can see here that what they get is, I've highlighted it, all the rights of a subject through this. So this becomes a much more popular method than being a denizen, because this is giving you all the rights of subjecthood here. So now we have the whole kind of set of how aliens become subjects and how people become subjects. But when did controlling aliens start? That is the first act which actually specifies the control of aliens, the 1905 Act. On the face of it, the act is all about poor people, making sure no one becomes a pauper. It's about mental capacity. It's about criminal behavior, potentially controlling that. But actually, what this was used mainly for was to control Jewish immigration into England at that time, because there were various kinds of persecutions of Jewish populations in Eastern Europe and in Russia. And people were fleeing from there, and they were coming to the neighborhoods that they knew that other people were already in. So we had a lot of them in Lower East Side of London. And this is to actually target people who are there, who are paupers. There is a sense that these might be the breeding grounds of crime. So how do you control that? And so this is one of the first times there is a proper immigration. You have a sort of home office, you have a minister who is going to look into this, you have an appeals process, and you have criteria, and you also have other things happening, not just the criteria, but immigration control of a different kind. So the 1905 Act is really very, very interesting from that point of view. But the real concept of where aliens becomes really big in law is in the context of the war. So the Great War, first of all, the First World War, and then again the Second World War, at which time we have various restriction orders that will actually help the government in interning people who are considered enemy aliens. Now, who are enemy aliens? They're aliens, they're not subjects, so they cannot be from anywhere in the empire, but they're people who have been born in countries who are at war with Britain. That's the idea. First World War, mainly they were males of a certain age who could have been conscripted into military, and they are all from these countries. Many of them were interned in camps, and some of the arguments for this was, of course, there's a whole law and order and national security idea there, but also there is a lot about if we do not put them in these camps, we might find that they are attacked by others because there is so much hatred for, I think, German nationals at that time, Italian nationals at that time. And tragically, many of these people had actually fled those regimes and sought protection here. In the first place, fleeing these very countries, and now they find themselves in these camps. There's a lot of material on them in the National Archives, and they say that it wasn't really coercive. There was artistic communities, especially in the Second World War time. People were making music, and there is a whole lot of literature on the art that was being made there. But I just imagine if you have fled any of those regimes and then you find yourselves in these camps, it couldn't really have been a great experience, to say the least. First World War, mainly it was men of a certain age. Second World War, you get a lot of children and women as well in the camps. And I wondered why. The biggest reason for that is because women would lose their nationality if they married anyone who is an alien. So this particular case that I have here, again, I've chosen the cases which give you a good sense of what was happening at that time. And this is famous because the lady in this case, she's born in England to English parents, and she was an English subject, British subject. She gets married to a German national, and she holds some shares and stocks in an English company. And at the time when the war is finished, they have signed a peace treaty which allows the British government to liquidate all the assets of enemy aliens in this country. And at that point they say, well, you married a German national, so basically you're an enemy alien, so we can take this. And this woman then argues that not really, subjecthood is just by being born within the territory, and surely you just don't give it up by marrying someone. That cannot be it. That's not what allegiance is supposed to be. But they point to Section 10 of this Act. Section 10 very clearly says a woman who marries an alien takes on the nationality of the alien. So essentially, it means that at this point of time, you could have a lot of people who were British subjects, but who had married, and so a very gendered concept of who is an alien emerges from this. So what have I given this history tour to you for? To come to the present and think it's always been a legal category of the other. That's what it is. British subjecthood, as of now, is a dying category in the 1981 Act because British subjecthood became equated at some point with being a Commonwealth citizen, and at this point, even Commonwealth citizens do not have any rights that are exceptional or greater in terms of entry-exit anymore. And subjecthood cannot now be anymore inherited. You cannot get it by descent. It is a category, very small category of people who are potentially very old if they retained their subjecthood when the time their country became independent, who are now really old people. but they cannot transmit it to anyone else either. So it is a dying category. Alien continues to be defined in the 1981 Act exactly as David said in the introduction, as it was there in the University Challenge quiz, and I also watched that avidly. And it is that. It is somebody who is from a British protected person, a Commonwealth citizen, or Republic of Ireland national. If somebody is not one of those categories, and presumably they're not a British citizen too, which is not mentioned in that Section 51 of British Nationality Act, interestingly, and then they still continue to be alien by definition. But my question would be, who are these people? Because it literally is not really a big category at all, if any. And what is the utility of this category then? And I have here Matt Smith as Doctor Who here to keep up somewhat the science fiction alien contrast, but also because really good sense of correct use of the law here. In this is a ship in 1300 years into the future, a spaceship called Great Britain. And in that, the Queen is Liz 10. And every 5 years, people vote to forget their traumatic history. I mean, everyone literally decides to forget. They vote for it. And Doctor Who makes a joke, that's democracy in action for you. But what I liked is Liz 10 says that she never voted because she's technically not a British subject. That's correct, because she's the Queen. And you can't be. It's about allegiance to the Queen. It's not about being the Queen. Okay, so I've had my fun with that. On to more grim topics now. Let's go on to legal transplantation. Because the concept of alien didn't just remain here. It traveled across the British Empire, especially to the countries where there were settled societies of white British people. So let's start with how it was in Australia. Now, legal transplantation is a term of art which came about when Alan Watson started looking into sharing of legal knowledge across cultures, and he talked about how entire legal technology and systems can move from one place to another. Different matter if it becomes an irritant in that country, but it can move. And colonization and the flow of common law was one of those. So in Australia, what is interesting is the first use of this word comes actually to say that British subjects can be aliens, because they're not trying to enter or exit, they're already here. They moved during the times of empire. And now we need to exclude the people who are the wrong types of people whom we don't want inside. And that's a really racialized idea of who will be Australian. So I saw a lot of good work on this, but I'll briefly reference Joe McIntyre's work because he's written really good material on what the drafters talked about when they were talking about aliens. And the alien power, which is a section 51, subsection 19 of the Australian Constitution, which gives a federal power of control over aliens, right? When they drafted that, the drafters, I think there's someone called Barton who says, it's not about the admission of aliens, but it's concerned with aliens after they are here, because they're already there. And we should start with this conception of a racialized conception of who is alien, bring it to more modern times then, with a 2020 case, which is still good law, which is the Love and Thoms case. And I think here is an extreme form of saying who is an alien, because this case becomes about Aboriginal Australians being defined as aliens. Why? Because, the Aboriginal Australians, first people of the land, but in this instance, even though the two people are recognized to be Aboriginal Australians, they were born outside of Australia. So one was born in New Zealand, the other one was born in Papua New Guinea. They had criminal records. Idea was to deport them as foreign nationals. So both of them then used the test of who is an Aboriginal. You're a person who's recognized by your tribe, your tribal leader, and you self-identify. You have a tripartite kind of thing going, and then you are an Aboriginal, so you have special rights. You have special connections to the land and to the water of this land, even if you're not a citizen, right? But interesting decision from the Highest Court of Australia, 4:3 split, in which 4 judges say, of course, they're Aboriginal and they have a special spiritual connection with this land, so there is no way we can call them aliens. Other 3 judges saying this brings an uncertainty into what this word actually means, Australian citizenship, because people can self-identify in this. So it brings an uncertainty. Anyway, this is good law, but I use it mainly to show to you the extreme form of exclusion and racialization which can happen through the use of the word alien. Finally, we come to the United States. I've already told you a little bit about the Alien Act that we're going to talk about. But the US, the most interesting thing is the first use of the word aliens was actually for British subjects who were in the United States at the time and directly after the War of Independence, because they are the ones who had become enemies at that point. So we have an 1812 memo signed by the US Secretary of State, James Monroe, saying, all subjects of His Britannic Majesty residing within the United States have become alien enemies. And how was he doing that? It was through that act that President Trump has referenced, which is Alien Enemies Act of 1798, right? And I think it's sort of a full circle moment for the word alien to have originated here and now in the US to have been used about the subjects who were there to be designated. Of course, that was not the end of it. It was also used in the two wars subsequently to intern people. I am not going to go into all of that. I'll just briefly talk about Chinese exclusion coming in as the first set of laws that specifically target a particular nationality and ethnicity for exclusion. And then the struggle that goes on with that carries on until it's 1943, I think, finally, when they put in quotas rather than just excluding wholly. But the idea was to simply ensure there was no Chinese labor coming in at all. And it also extends to include everybody else from Asia through a piece of legislation called the Asiatic Barred Zone Act of 1917. I am going to tell you a little bit about that because it's really interesting. This case about that is very interesting. Again, a lot of cases like this, I selected this one because it's the best known one for this. What happened after that 1917 act is that the US government decided some people from South Asia who have naturalized as American are not suitable now. They're from Asiatic barred zones. They're foreign nationals who shouldn't be becoming Americans. So denaturalize them. So this person, Bhagat Singh Thind, actually had American nationality. He had fought in the First World War. He had a higher degree. He had come from for higher studies, married to a white woman, American, and he was naturalized and then he was denaturalized. And he challenged that, and they said, there is this law and you are an alien who is not suitable for American citizenship as per this law. And it's fascinating because throughout in his arguments, he's trying to argue that he's actually Caucasian white and he's an Aryan, and his culture, which is Punjabi Indian, is actually his high caste, and it's similar to being white because the languages are so linked. So they are Aryan through the whole racial anthropology of it, and how that is so much superior and better than anything else, right? And he's arguing that because he has to argue that in order to qualify under this, to be a suitable alien. Otherwise, he would not be. And the court says, actually, it's not about racial similarity, it's about racial difference. And you are still racially different enough to be excluded. He loses his citizenship. Not only that, even the first person from India who was ever naturalized, A.K. Mazumdar, he loses his citizenship. And some hundreds more lose their citizenship as a fallout of this case. And this carries on then until we have the war context of the Second World War, when suddenly Indians became quite valuable for the war effort. So you have a reversal of this policy coming in. But it is so interesting for showing how the word alien and the way its racialization has really taken place. Of course, it still exists as a legal category in the United States. It's there in the Immigration and Nationality Act. It's there in the US Code. All the headlines on the headings also say things like aliens and nationality, and then alien terrorist removal procedures. It's there everywhere. We have Alien Tort Claims Act, so it's not just about immigration either. But more than that, it exists metaphorically as well. So in Supreme Court judgments in the United States, for instance, There is a fascinating piece that I read by Professor Keith Cunningham Parameter. He looks at the use of language through cognitive linguistics and what judges do. And he has shown how they use these metaphors about floods of migrants, illegal aliens invading, and these type of very dehumanizing metaphors, which is not from the gutter press, but from the Hearst Court of the United States, and really goes through it. And it's fascinating how it's not just about the words, but also the metaphors and imagery of dehumanization then. Now, it's not all grim. It needn't be this way, because the word aliens also found its way to New Zealand and Canada in the very same way as it did in Australia and United States. But New Zealand and Canada also interned people during wars and around with similar laws, all that, but they dropped the word. So in 2009, we find that New Zealand has discontinued using it in its current immigration law, and Canada did it even earlier. It did it in 2002. So it is possible, where it doesn't matter as a category anymore, to take this word out of this context. So I'm going to end there, and I have to come back to some more science fiction, because we know Spock, he's Vulcan, half Vulcan. The only difference between him and human beings is that, his superior mind-melding powers and apparently a lack of emotions. But otherwise, we have all the human attributes highlighted. There is a trend in science fiction to actually humanize aliens more and more. And direct contrast to how we're dehumanizing a lot of people by terming them as aliens. So I think it's my sort of motion, if you please, that we need to consider, do we need this in UK law at all, given it doesn't serve much of a legal category purpose anymore. And I welcome questions from all of you. Looking forward to it.